Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight, we journey to a secluded lakeside retreat where whispers of the past ripple through the still waters. A lone lantern flickers across the dark surface, signaling secrets that should have remained buried. But when murder strikes under the cover of mist, only one man, Hercule Poirot, with his brilliant little gray cells, can untangle the lies, the fears, and the shadows surrounding the lake. This is The Lantern by the Lake, a Hercule Poirot mystery. So don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to keep uncovering more mysteries with us. Now let's dive in. Chapter 1: Shadows over Still Water. The lake lay silent beneath the mantle of night, its surface like a sheet of blackened glass. A mist had risen with the dusk, curling in ghostly tendrils about the reeds and drifting out across the still expanse. All was calm, save for a single flicker of light, a lantern glowing upon the far shore. Its beam quivered and danced, 3 short bursts followed by one long, repeated in measured rhythm. Hercule Poirot stood upon the stone terrace of the Hotel du Lac, his small, stout figure wrapped in immaculate evening attire. His patent leather shoes gleamed faintly in the lamplight, and his mustaches, waxed to perfection, quivered ever so slightly as he regarded the scene before him. "Regard as Hastings," he said softly, tapping the arm of his companion. "Do you see? There across the water." Captain Hastings, taller and broad-shouldered, squinted into the fog. "A lantern, you mean?" "Fishermen, perhaps. They often use lights to guide themselves." Poirot shook his head with a quiet certainty. "No, mon ami. This is no idle fisherman's glow. Observe 3 flashes, then 1 long. And again, it is deliberate. It is order. And where there is order, there is intent." Hastings gave a mild chuckle, though his eyes did not leave the strange signal. "Well, I suppose if there's a mystery to be found, you'll sniff it out, Poirot. Still, one can't send Scotland Yard running every time a light flickers in the fog." Poirot's lips pursed in mild amusement. "You mock, Hastings, but the lantern, it intrigues me. Perhaps it is nothing. Perhaps it is everything." The 2 gentlemen lingered, their conversation mingling with the distant sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from the hotel lounge. The Hotel du Lac was a place of quiet elegance. Its French proprietor, Madame Eloise Durant, priding herself on discretion and refinement. Tucked deep in the English countryside, the hotel overlooked the great lake that had given it its name, a place of leisure for the wealthy and of curiosity for those who found poetry in the mist. It was Poirot's habit to take an evening promenade after dinner, a matter of health and digestion, but also of order, for his routine was sacred. Hastings, faithful friend and occasional foil, accompanied him with a mixture of affection and bemusement. Tonight, however, that orderly ritual had been disturbed. The lantern continued its strange semaphore across the water, a ghostly signal calling out into the night. Before Poirot could say more, a commotion rose near the jetty. The night porter, a young man with a lantern of his own, was running along the bank shouting. Guests spilled from the lounge onto the terrace, their laughter replaced by startled murmurs. Poirot and Hastings moved swiftly to the rail, their eyes following the line of the porter's frantic gestures. There in the reeds, a pale shape drifted, caught in the sluggish current. The mist parted for a moment, and the truth was revealed in the pale light of the moon. The shape was a woman's body. Hastings inhaled sharply. "Good Lord!" Poirot's gaze sharpened, every fiber of his being alert. "Come, Hastings, vite." They hurried down to the shore as staff and guests gathered, their voices rising in alarm. The porter's lantern illuminated the lifeless figure as it was drawn closer. She wore a white gown, soaked and clinging to her form. Her hair, once styled in careful curls, now streamed in sodden strands across her face. On her wrist glimmered a jeweled bracelet, incongruously bright against the pallor of her skin. The body was lifted gently from the water and laid upon the grass. Poirot knelt beside it, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He noted the unnatural angle of the neck, the faint blue tinge of the lips. He leaned closer, his nose twitching delicately. Bitter almonds, he murmured. Hastings bent low, frowning. You mean? Oui. The odor is unmistakable. Cyanide. Poirot's voice was quiet but certain. Around them, whispers spread as names were exchanged. The victim was swiftly identified as Lady Margaret Whitcomb, heiress to the Whitcomb shipping fortune. She had been a guest at the Hotel du Lac these past weeks, a woman of striking beauty and considerable wealth. Earlier that very evening, she had dined in the company of her fiancé, Mr. Charles Linton, her cousin and companion, Miss Clara Whitcomb, the visiting artist, Mr. Felix Arkwright, and Madame Eloise Durant herself. To all appearances, it had been an evening of gaiety, champagne, and light conversation. And now she lay dead at the water's edge. Poirot's eyes drifted to her shoes, delicate satin slippers, unmarked by mud despite her having been pulled from the reeds. Curious, most curious. Poirot, Hastings whispered. Do you think she fell in? Lost her way in the mist. Poirot's mustaches bristled. Non, Hastings. This is no accident. Her shoes are clean. Her jewelry remains upon her person, though of considerable value. And there, do you see? Her fingers are clenched, as though in resistance. No, mon ami, this is not the lake's doing. It is murder. The crowd drew back as the local constabulary was summoned. Inspector Graves, a broad-shouldered man with a bristling mustache of his own and a skeptical eye, arrived at dawn in a motor car that crunched upon the gravel drive. His manner was brisk, his patience thin. A foreign detective, he said with a sniff upon seeing Poirot at the scene. Best leave it to the Yard, monsieur. We've no need of theatrics here. Poirot inclined his head politely. As you wish, Inspector. And yet, one cannot unsee what one has seen. Perhaps you will indulge me if I make my little observations. N'est-ce pas? Graves gave a curt nod, already barking orders to his men. But Poirot's gaze was elsewhere. Across the lake, the mist was lifting. The far bank, where the lantern had glowed so insistently in the night, now lay bare and empty. Not a trace of the light remained. No lantern, no footprint, no witness. Only the silent water, reflecting the pale dawn. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his eyes narrowing. The lantern, Hastings. It is gone. Yes, but what of it? Couldn't it have been coincidence? Non. Coincidence, Hastings, is the refuge of the lazy mind. The lantern signaled, then a body was found, and now it has vanished as though it never was. That, mon ami, is no accident. It is the opening move in a game most serious. He turned, surveying the assembled guests who stood in various states of shock and distress. Charles Linton, tall and dark, his jaw set in grim determination. Clara Whitcomb, pale and trembling, her eyes darting nervously. Felix Arkwright, the artist, his face drawn but curiously detached, as though already sketching the scene in his mind. Madame Durant, wringing her hands and murmuring assurances in her French-accented English, desperate to keep scandal from staining her establishment. Poirot's gaze lingered upon each in turn. Yes, he whispered, each of them with a secret, perhaps, each with a motive, peut-être. The truth lies here, Hastings, as surely as it lies in the reflection upon water. Distorted, yes, but when the ripples still, then we shall see clearly. The lake lapped softly against the reeds, its silence both witness and accomplice. The mist rose higher, veiling the far shore. And upon the terrace of the Hotel du Lac, a case had begun, a case of murder, of shadows, and of a lantern by the lake. Chapter 2, Secrets Along the Shore. The Hotel du Lac greeted the morning not with the soft gaiety of a summer resort, but with the solemn hush of a place struck by tragedy. Where once laughter had drifted across the terrace, there was now only whispers, strained and subdued. Even the lake seemed to mourn, its waters dulled beneath a drifting veil of mist. Guests passed one another with quick glances, as though fearful their words might be overheard and twisted into something incriminating. Poirot, composed and deliberate, sat at the breakfast table with Hastings. His cup of chocolate was stirred with the usual care, though his eyes, dark and contemplative, were fixed upon the terrace windows and the lake beyond. "Hastings," he said at last, "the water of the lake, it keeps its secrets well. Yet the truth, that cannot be drowned. It floats, it bobs to the surface when one least expects it." Hastings lowered his newspaper, the headlines screaming already of tragedy. "But you mean to begin your questioning today? Linton, Clara, that painter fellow, all of them." Poirot inclined his head. "But of course, each person is like a pebble cast into still water. The ripples intersect, overlap. Follow them, mon ami, and one finds where the current leads." Their first interview was with Charles Linton, whom they discovered brooding in the smoking room. He stood rigidly before the hearth, though no fire burned, his hand clenched about a brandy glass, though it was scarcely past 9 in the morning. His voice, when he spoke, was clipped and defensive. He declared their inquiries distasteful, unnecessary. Poirot, with quiet courtesy, insisted that truth was the only justice that remained to Lady Margaret, and Charles, after a moment's struggle, relented. The quarrel at dinner, he admitted, had indeed been about her plan to travel with Clara to Venice. He had forbidden it, calling it improper for a bride-to-be, and she had laughed, declaring she would see the lanterns on the canals whether he approved or not. He swore he loved her, swore it with bitterness in his throat, but Poirot noted the tremor of his hand upon the glass. Love, after all, can cut both ways. Clara Whitcomb was found wandering the gardens, her hands wringing a damp handkerchief, her face pale and drawn. She spoke with trembling earnestness of her devotion to her cousin, of the bond they shared. At Poirot's gentle questions, she revealed something startling. Lady Margaret had intended to alter her will. She had wished to secure Clara's future, and Charles had been furious when he overheard. Margaret, Clara said, was determined to decide her own fate in love as in fortune. Her courage had frightened those who wished to bind her, and Poirot listened with eyes half closed, turning the words over in his mind. Felix Arkwright, the artist, received them in the lounge, sketchbook upon his knees, his fingers darkened with charcoal. His manner was soft, reflective, touched with a kind of poetic melancholy. Margaret had fascinated him. He confessed, her laughter and presence like light caught in a prism. He had noticed, he added, the tension at dinner, the storm that rippled beneath polite words. She had worn a jeweled bracelet, playing with it idly, as though it were not mere ornament, but some secret token. When Poirot asked about the lantern upon the lake, Arkwright's eyes flickered, the hesitation of a man caught off guard. He claimed to have seen nothing, but Poirot's little gray cells did not forget such falterings. Madame Eloise Durant, the proprietress, fussed nervously among her papers when they entered her office. Her despair seemed fixed not upon the loss of life, but upon the scandal threatening her hotel's reputation. She spoke of Margaret's generosity, of careless talk about buying the hotel itself, though whether it was serious or not she could not say. At the mention of raised voices at dinner, she admitted retreating early, unwilling to bear unpleasantness. Of the lantern, she professed ignorance, though Poirot watched her eyes dart away too swiftly for comfort. A woman concerned above all with appearances, with reputation, with money, and yet money was often the very root of darker deeds. By noon Poirot had questioned them all. He returned to the terrace with Hastings at his side, his gaze upon the mist-thickened waters where no lantern shone now. Hastings leaned eagerly forward. "Well, Poirot, what do you make of them?" Poirot clasped his hands, his voice low and thoughtful. "They're like the reeds of the lake, mon ami. Each bends differently in the wind, but beneath the surface their roots are entangled." Lady Margaret spoke of journeys, of wills, of freedom. She quarreled with her fiancé. She promised her cousin security. She toyed with a bracelet that may yet speak of secrets. Each has reason to be uneasy. But the lantern, Hastings, the lantern is the key. Find the lantern, and we shall find the killer. The mist coiled tighter over the lake, cloaking the far shore. Yet Poirot's eyes gleamed with certainty, as though he alone could pierce its veil. "It is not ended," he murmured. "Non, it has only begun." Chapter 3. The lantern's shadow. The day lengthened into afternoon, and with it came an uneasy restlessness that spread across the hotel du Lac like a contagion. Guests gathered in small knots in the lounge and corridors, their voices hushed, but their eyes ever watchful. The very walls seemed to lean closer, listening to secrets that were not meant for them. Poirot, however, appeared as tranquil as if he were preparing for an afternoon promenade, his mustaches impeccable, his shoes gleaming, his cane tapping rhythmically against the marble floor. Yet Hastings, who knew him well, detected that quick spark in the detective's eyes, which signaled the presence of a thought not yet spoken. It was just after luncheon when Inspector Grange of the local constabulary arrived, a stout man with the air of one perpetually burdened by duties he would rather not bear. He accepted Poirot's involvement with grudging respect, though his skepticism was barely veiled. "I've seen drownings before, Monsieur Poirot. Not every shadow upon the water hides a murderer." Poirot merely inclined his head. "And yet, mon cher inspecteur, you have also seen crimes dressed as accidents. And n'est-ce pas? Death, she is a clever actress. But even the cleverest performance leaves behind its imperfections." Grange harumphed, but agreed to accompany Poirot as he retraced the path along the lake shore. The mist had lifted, leaving the water clear and glassy, reflecting every ripple with unnatural precision. Hastings followed, his gaze darting nervously toward the reeds where Margaret's body had been discovered. It was Hastings who noticed it first. "Good Lord, Poirot, look there!" Half hidden among the reeds, lodged against a fallen branch, was a fragment of lantern glass, still tinged with soot as though it had burned recently. Poirot knelt with surprising agility, drawing out the piece with his gloved fingers. He studied it intently, his head bent, mustaches quivering. A lantern, yes, and of a very particular design. Not the hotel's, Hastings, nor of the common sort one carries for fishing. This was finer, more delicate, one that belonged to someone here, perhaps. We must discover whose. The inspector muttered about coincidence, but Poirot merely smiled, slipping the fragment carefully into a paper envelope. Coincidence, mon cher Grange, is the refuge of the unimaginative. One does not drop a burning lantern by chance at the exact spot where a lady meets her death. Non, this lantern was the witness, perhaps even the accomplice. Their return to the hotel was met with a stir. Whispers rose among the guests as Poirot summoned several to the drawing-room for further questioning. The air was thick with tension, as though each person carried a private dread that the glass might prove their undoing. Charles Linton was the first to react with anger. He declared the lantern meant nothing, that Margaret herself often carried one upon her evening walks. Yet when pressed, he could not describe it accurately, the size, the make, the handle. His evasions only deepened the shadow upon him. Clara Whitcomb grew pale at the mention, wringing her hands until her knuckles whitened. She admitted Margaret had indeed spoken of a lantern, but insisted it was symbolic, a romantic notion, something she wished to carry when she and Clara traveled abroad. Her words tumbled out in confusion, sincerity perhaps, or the careful weaving of a lie. It was Felix Arkwright, the artist, who grew most agitated. At first he dismissed the idea with an airy laugh, but Poirot, with his gentle persistence, drew from him a reluctant confession. He had once borrowed such a lantern from the hotel stores to study its glow for a painting. He returned it, he claimed, weeks before. His eyes, however, shifted too quickly, and Poirot noted the smudge of fresh soot upon his sleeve. Madame Durant, confronted with the fragment, stiffened at once. She declared all the hotel's lanterns were accounted for, locked in the cellar, and that any suggestion of one being missing was preposterous. Yet she refused to allow Poirot immediate access to the storeroom, citing disarray, and her protest was so vehement that Hastings whispered to Poirot afterward, "She's hiding something, old chap. I'd stake my life on it." Poirot, however, only tapped his nose with a finger. "Patience, Hastings. The truth, she is like the fish in the lake, elusive, but always leaving ripples upon the surface." That evening, As the sun sank and the first stars pricked the darkening sky, Poirot took Hastings to the terrace. From there, the waters stretched calm and wide, yet to Hastings they seemed suddenly sinister, as though holding in their depths a secret too great to bear. Poirot leaned upon the balustrade, his gaze fixed upon the horizon. "We have a shadow of the lantern, mon ami, but the hand that lit it, that is what we must find. And soon, before another shadow falls across these waters." The words hung in the air, heavy, prophetic. And somewhere within the hotel, behind closed doors, a guilty heart must have trembled, for Poirot had taken the first step into their carefully guarded darkness. Chapter 4: Reflections in the Glass. The night that followed was uneasy. Though the staff of the Hotel du Lac endeavored to maintain its customary air of refinement, a subtle strain hung in every corridor. Doors were bolted, windows latched, and footsteps in the hall carried with them the nervous haste of guests eager to avoid even the appearance of suspicion. Hastings slept little, disturbed by strange dreams in which lanterns flickered across dark waters, always vanishing the moment he reached out a hand to grasp them. Poirot, however, rose at dawn immaculate, as if his rest had been untroubled, his mustaches and mind both in perfect order. "Come, Hastings," he declared, rapping smartly upon his friend's door. "The lake, she has yielded a fragment of glass. But a fragment is only the beginning. We must see the whole picture, the reflection, the symmetry. Only then will the little gray cells be satisfied." By mid-morning, Poirot had obtained the inspector's reluctant consent to inspect the hotel's lantern stores. Madame Durand received them with visible dismay, her protests thinly veiled in excuses about untidiness and staff negligence. Yet Poirot's gaze, sharp as a hawk's, swept through the cellar shelves until it rested upon a space conspicuously bare. He crouched, touched the dustless outline where once an object had stood, and smiled. "Regard as Hastings, a lantern was here recently, and now, poof, it has walked away." Madame Durand wrung her hands, protesting that inventory was not her task, that staff misplacements occurred often, that surely no one suggested her establishment could be involved in such sordid matters. Poirot soothed her with a gentle courtesy, though his eyes glinted with quiet triumph. "Madam, one does not accuse. One observes, and one notes when order, which is the soul of civilization, has been disturbed." That afternoon, an unexpected commotion stirred the hotel. A maid, sent to tidy Felix Arkwright's suite, shrieked upon discovering among his belongings a lantern concealed beneath a drape of canvas. Its frame was dented, its glass cracked, and faint traces of soot still lingered upon the rim. The inspector seized upon it as proof, declaring the artist guilty beyond doubt. Hastings himself, flushed with indignation, exclaimed that the fellow had played them false all along. Yet Poirot, examining the lantern with delicate precision, merely raised a finger. "No, no, Hastings, the matter is not so simple. Look, here upon the handle, the tarnish is uneven. It has been wiped, but only in part. And the wick, it has not been trimmed as an artist would use for study. Non, this lantern was employed, and recently. But to light what? Or whom?" Arkwright, confronted, grew impassioned. He admitted borrowing the lantern again, but swore it was to capture the precise reflection of flame upon water for a series of nocturnes he planned to exhibit. He denied with fury any hand in Margaret's death, declaring she had been his muse, his one true subject. His protestations rang with both sincerity and desperation, and Poirot regarded him with grave interest. The artist, Hastings, he sees more than others, sometimes too much, sometimes enough to endanger him. It was later that same evening when the case took a darker turn. Clara Whitcomb, pale and trembling, approached Poirot upon the terrace, begging a private word. Her cousin's death, she confessed, weighed terribly upon her conscience. There was something she had withheld. Margaret had shown her a letter she had received only days before, warning her not to proceed with her marriage. The handwriting was disguised, but the message was clear. "Do not wed. or death will follow. Margaret had laughed it off, declaring it a jest or the envy of some spurned acquaintance. Clara had urged caution, but Margaret would not be dissuaded. Now Clara feared her silence had cost her cousin her life. Before Poirot could press her further, a sudden shout echoed from the gardens. Guests rushed to the balustrade, and Hastings, craning forward, saw a figure stumbling by the lakeshore. It was Charles Linton. His face was ashen, his clothes disheveled, his eyes wild. In his hand he clutched a torn scrap of paper, damp and nearly illegible. "She was right," he cried hoarsely. "She was right all along." And with that he collapsed upon the gravel path. Inspector Grange hastened to his aid, while Poirot bent to retrieve the sodden fragment. The ink had blurred, but a few words remained stark upon the page. "The lantern is not extinguished. It burns still. Beware." The assembled crowd murmured with unease, their faces pale in the moonlight. Poirot straightened, holding the paper delicately between thumb and forefinger. His voice, calm but edged with steel, carried across the terrace. "Messieurs, mesdames, we are not at the end of this matter. Non, we stand only in the middle of a puzzle most perilous. There is one among us who plays a game most cruel, and the lantern, she casts a light that grows ever brighter. Very soon, it will illuminate the guilty face." Hastings shivered, for the waters of the lake seemed to shimmer with a strange reflection, as though a lantern indeed burned somewhere within their depths. Chapter 5. The Lake's Final Secret. The following evening, Poirot requested the presence of all principal guests and staff in the grand salon of the Hôtel du Lac. The air was heavy with anticipation, for each person assembled bore upon their face a mask of unease. The windows stood open to the lake beyond, where the moon had begun its slow ascent, turning the waters to silver. Candles flickered, shadows lengthened, and the silence was broken only by the delicate ticking of the mantel clock. Poirot, immaculate as ever, stood at the center of the room, his small frame exuding a quiet authority that drew every gaze. "My friends," he began, his voice calm, precise, yet carrying the weight of inevitability, "a dreadful tragedy has darkened this house by the lake. Lady Margaret is dead. To some, it might appear an accident. To others, a mystery too thickly veiled. But to Hercule Poirot, he tapped his temple with a finger, there are always the little gray cells which cannot be deceived." He paused, letting his words settle, then cast his gaze slowly over the assembly. Charles Linton sat rigid, his hands clenched upon his knees. Clara Whitcomb trembled visibly, her eyes red from sleepless nights. Felix Arkwright fidgeted with his sketchbook, his nervous energy plain for all to see. Madame Durant, the proprietress, sat with chin high, her lips pressed thin. Inspector Grange leaned back with arms crossed, prepared to scoff yet unwilling to miss a word. Poirot continued, "We must begin naturellement with the lantern, for it is not a mere trinket, a coincidence, as some would have us believe. Non, the lantern is the key, the symbol, the weapon even." A lantern was taken from the hotel stores. It was lit, placed upon the water. Why? To lure Lady Margaret to the shore. She was told, perhaps by a note, perhaps by whispered promise, that the lantern would burn as a signal, a meeting, a secret rendezvous. She followed, trusting as she always did, and there, upon the reeds, death awaited her. Gasps rose from the guests. Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. The lantern fragment was found, hidden in the reeds. Another lantern, dented and charred, was discovered among the possessions of Monsieur Arkwright, our artist. A clumsy attempt to frame him, mais oui, but easily revealed. Why? Because the wick was cut with precision, the kind a lady might use in her household, not a painter for his studies. No, the lantern was not his. It belonged to another. Arkwright exhaled with relief, though his eyes still darted nervously. Poirot turned slowly, fixing his gaze upon Clara. "Mademoiselle Whitcomb, you loved your cousin dearly. Too dearly, perhaps. You feared her marriage, for with it you would lose her companionship, her inheritance, her very place in life. You spoke of Venice, of lanterns upon the canals. It was you who urged her to meet you at the shore, was it not? To speak one final time, to persuade her, to hold her back. Clara gave a small cry, shaking her head violently. No, I adore Margaret. I would never, never. Poirot inclined his head gently. Just so. You adored her, but you did not kill her. For though you had cause, you lacked the method. Non, the true killer is another. He turned then, swiftly, his eyes narrowing upon Charles Linton. Monsieur, you quarreled with your fiancée. You railed against her independence, her will, her fortune. You sought to bind her, to own her. When she resisted, you grew desperate. You wrote the anonymous letters, warning her against the marriage, though in truth they were warnings you meant for yourself. You set the lantern upon the water, knowing she would come. And when she did, you forced her beneath those reeds, ensuring the lake would swallow her protestations. But alas, you did not reckon with Hercule Poirot, nor with the light of the lantern which, once lit, cannot be extinguished so easily. Charles lurched to his feet, his face ashen, his lips trembling. That is a lie. You cannot prove. Poirot raised a finger, and from his pocket produced the sodden scrap of paper Charles had clutched when found upon the path. But I can. For this paper, though blurred, bears ink of the very same shade and hand as the warning letter your fiancé received. The disguise of the writing was clever, but not clever enough. And the lantern, its missing piece fits perfectly the dent upon the hotel's shelves. The maid saw you lingering near the storeroom the very night before the crime. It is enough. Inspector Grange, I present to you the murderer. The room erupted. Clara sobbed openly. Arkwright dropped his sketchbook in shock, and Madame Durant gasped with a hand to her throat. Charles, cornered, staggered backwards, his protests turning to incoherent mutters. The inspector seized him firmly, snapping the handcuffs closed with grim satisfaction. Poirot, smoothing his mustache, surveyed the room with quiet gravity. Lady Margaret was a woman of spirit who sought freedom and light. It is bitter indeed that she was betrayed by the one who promised her devotion. Yet justice she will not be denied. That, Amias Amos, is the final secret of the lake. The windows rattled softly as a breeze passed over the water, carrying with it the faint shimmer of reflected moonlight, as though the lantern still burned far beneath the surface. Hastings, shuddering, glanced at Poirot. Extraordinary, Poirot. You saw it all, when the rest of us saw nothing. Poirot gave a small, satisfied bow. It is the order, Hastings. Always the order. Where others see shadows, Hercule Poirot sees the pattern. The clock chimed, solemn and deliberate. In the hush that followed, the guests knew the case had reached its close. Yet the lake remained inscrutable, reflecting back their faces with perfect calm, as if it held still deeper secrets not yet told. And so the tale concludes, Amias Amos. If you have enjoyed accompanying Hercule Poirot in unraveling this mystery by the lake, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share so that his next case may find you swiftly. For where there is crime, where there is shadow, there will always be the little gray cells to cast their light.